Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled across the open plains like a wounded animal, carrying dust that could strip a man's skin raw if he wasn't careful. 25-year-old Andrew Ryder pulled his hat lower as he guided his horse through the gathering storm toward the distant lights of Silver Creek. The frontier had taught him one immutable truth over the years. Trust was a luxury a man couldn't afford out here. Trust got good men killed. His father's voice still echoed in his mind, 7 years after the man had been gunned down by someone he'd called friend. The only person you can count on is yourself, son. Remember that. Andrew had taken those words to heart, wandering from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to form attachments. The less people knew about him, the safer he was. The fewer people he cared about, the less it would hurt when they inevitably betrayed him or left. As Silver Creek's modest collection of wooden buildings came into view, Andrew patted his horse's neck. "Just you and me, Maverick." "The way it should be," the gelding snorted as if in agreement. The town wasn't much: a general store, a saloon called the Lucky Strike, a small hotel, and a smattering of other businesses, but it was shelter from the approaching storm. Andrew had heard they needed hands at the Double Circle Ranch nearby. He'd work there through winter, save his money, then move on before anyone got too familiar. It was the pattern that had kept him alive this long. He dismounted outside the saloon, his boots hitting the muddy ground with a soft thud. Inside, the warmth and noise washed over him: piano music, boisterous laughter, the clink of glasses. He found a spot at the bar and ordered whiskey, keeping his head down. A cowboy learned to be invisible when necessary. "You must be looking for work," said the bartender, sliding the glass toward him. "Double Circle hiring again." Andrew nodded, surprised. Word travels fast. "Small town," the bartender shrugged. "Mr. Patterson lost 3 hands last month. Supposedly the new schoolteacher ran them off." That caught Andrew's attention. A schoolteacher. The bartender leaned in. "Miss Zoe Grayson. 22 years old with hair like sunshine and a face prettier than a spring morning. But don't let that fool you." He tapped the bar meaningfully. "She's trouble, that one. Came from back east with all sorts of ideas about how things should be. Already had half the town in an uproar about building a proper school. Patterson's hands quit after she shamed them for how they treated the Mexican families working at the ranch." Andrew took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Sounds like someone to avoid." "Smart man," the bartender nodded approvingly. "She may look like an angel, but she's stirring up more dust than this storm, the kind of woman who makes men lose their good sense." Andrew had met the type before: beautiful women who used their charm to manipulate men into fighting their battles. He'd seen good cowboys turn on each other over such women. No, he'd steer clear of this schoolteacher. He had enough troubles without adding a beautiful troublemaker to the mix. The next morning dawned clear after the storm. Andrew rode out to the Double Circle, where he found the foreman, a grizzled man named Tucker, inspecting a damaged fence. "Looking for work," Andrew said simply. Tucker sized him up with narrowed eyes. "You know cattle. Worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming. Can you ride rope?" "Since I was old enough to sit a horse." Tucker grunted. "We lost some men. Need someone who can keep his head down and do the job without getting mixed up in town nonsense." "I mind my own business," Andrew assured him. "Good, then you're hired. Bunkhouse is that way. We pay fair, but you answer to me and Mr. Patterson." Andrew nodded, relieved at how simple it had been. As he rode toward the bunkhouse, he passed a small creek where a figure knelt at the water's edge. The sun caught her hair, golden blonde, swept into a loose bun, with tendrils escaping around her face. She wore a simple blue dress, the hem slightly mudded, and appeared to be collecting something from the water. He intended to ride past without interruption, but her horse, tethered nearby, suddenly spooked at something in the brush. The animal reared, breaking free of its loose tether, and bolted straight toward the woman. Without thinking, Andrew spurred Maverick forward, intercepting the panicked horse before it could trample her. He caught the reins, speaking in low, soothing tones until the animal calmed. The woman stood, clutching a small basket. Her eyes, as blue as a summer sky, fixed on him with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Belle has never done that before." Andrew touched the brim of his hat. "No harm done, ma'am." He handed over the reins, careful not to let their fingers brush. "You must be new to Silver Creek. I'm Zoe Grayson, the schoolteacher." She offered a smile that transformed her already pretty face into something truly captivating. So this was the troublemaker. Up close, Andrew could see how men might lose their senses around her. Her face had a delicate quality, high cheekbones, a straight nose dusted with freckles, and those striking blue eyes framed by long lashes. Andrew Ryder, he replied stiffly, just hired at Double Circle. Oh, her smile faltered slightly. Well, I hope you'll find Silver Creek welcoming, Mr. Ryder. Just passing through, ma'am. Don't plan on staying long. He couldn't help noticing the basket she carried contained various plants and flowers. She followed his gaze. For the children, she explained. I'm teaching them about local plants, which are medicinal, which are harmful. Knowledge that might save a life someday. It wasn't what he expected a troublemaking schoolteacher to say. Before he could respond, she expertly mounted her horse, adjusting her skirts with practiced ease. Thank you again for your help, Mr. Ryder. Perhaps I'll see you in town sometime. With a slight nod, she rode off, sitting straight and confident in the saddle. Andrew watched her go, puzzled by the encounter. She hadn't seemed like someone stirring up trouble, just a young woman teaching children about plants. Still, he reminded himself that appearances were deceiving. The most dangerous people often wore the kindest faces. The next few weeks fell into a familiar routine. Andrew worked from dawn until dusk, breaking horses, mending fences, and driving cattle. He kept to himself, eating quickly during meals, and retiring to his bunk to read or write in his journal while the other hands played cards or swapped stories. They were decent enough men, but getting close meant eventual betrayal or loss. Better to maintain distance. His path crossed with Zoe Grayson's several more times in town, at the general store where she was helping an elderly Mexican woman communicate with the shopkeeper, outside the makeshift schoolhouse where she taught children of all backgrounds, and once at the small church where she led the children's choir. Each time, she greeted him with a warm smile that he acknowledged with nothing more than a tip of his hat. Yet he found himself watching her interactions with others, how she treated everyone with the same respectful attention, whether they were wealthy ranchers or poor farmhands. It contradicted everything he'd heard about her being trouble. One evening, as Andrew returned from a long day of repairing the north pasture fence, Tucker intercepted him near the barn. Need you to deliver these papers to Miss Grayson in town, the foreman said, holding out a sealed envelope. Patterson's donation for school supplies, nobody else I can spare right now. Andrew hesitated. I'm not sure. It's an order, not a request, Tucker cut him off. You've been doing good work, Ryder. Don't make me regret hiring you. Reluctantly, Andrew took the envelope. In town, he found the schoolhouse empty, a note on the door directing visitors to Miss Grayson's small house behind the church. He knocked on the door, hoping to simply hand over the envelope and leave. When Zoe opened the door, he was struck by how different she looked. Her golden hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she'd exchanged her usual modest teaching attire for a simpler home dress of soft green cotton. A smudge of flour dusted one cheek. Mr. Ryder, she said, genuine surprise in her voice, this is unexpected. From Mr. Patterson, he held out the envelope for the school. Oh, please thank him for me. She took the envelope, then hesitated. Would you like to come in for coffee? I've just made apple pie. The aroma wafting from inside made his stomach rumble. It had been years since he'd had homemade pie. I should get back, he said, even as he wavered. Something crashed inside the house, followed by a child's cry. Zoe spun around, hurrying back inside. Concerned, Andrew followed without thinking. Inside, a young boy of about 7 sat on the floor beside a broken plate, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. I just wanted to help set the table. It's all right, Miguel, she soothed, kneeling beside him and checking his hands for cuts. Are you hurt? The boy shook his head, still sniffling. Then there's no harm done. Plates can be replaced, she smiled, wiping away his tears. Why don't you get the broom while I check on the pie? Only then did she seem to remember Andrew's presence. Miguel's parents work late at the laundry on Wednesdays. He stays with me until they finish. Andrew found himself helping clean up the broken plate, while Zoe served the boy a slice of pie. There was nothing calculated or manipulative in her kindness, just a natural compassion that extended to everyone around her. Would you still like that coffee, Mr. Ryder? She asked once Miguel was happily eating. He should refuse. He should maintain his distance. But something about this scene, the warm kitchen, the smell of pie, the simple kindness he'd witnessed, made him nod. Over coffee and the best apple pie he'd tasted since his mother died, Andrew found himself talking more than he had in years. Zoe asked about his work, listening attentively as he explained the finer points of breaking horses and managing cattle. When Miguel chimed in with questions about cowboys, Andrew found himself telling stories that made the boys' eyes widen with excitement. "You should come to our class someday," Zoe suggested. "The children would love to hear about ranch life from someone who lives it." "I'm not much for public speaking," Andrew demurred. "Just think about it," she said, without pushing further. When Miguel's father arrived to collect him, Andrew realized with a start that he'd stayed for over an hour. As he rose to leave, Zoe walked him to the door. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Ryder. It's nice to talk with someone who doesn't look at me like I'm about to start a revolution." Andrew frowned. "Is that how people see you?" She laughed softly, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "When a woman speaks her mind in a place like Silver Creek, people tend to see trouble rather than truth." She met his eyes directly. "But I suspect you understand what it's like to be misjudged." The insight startled him. "What makes you say that?" "You keep to yourself, but you watch everything, and you're kinder than you want people to know," she smiled. "Good night, Mr. Ryder." As he rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Andrew found himself troubled by the encounter. Zoe Grayson wasn't at all what he'd been told to expect. Instead of a troublemaker, he'd found a woman with genuine compassion and intelligence. The realization was unsettling because it challenged his carefully constructed worldview. If people could be so wrong about her, what else might he be wrong about? Over the next few weeks, Andrew found himself looking for reasons to go into town. He'd volunteer for supply runs, mail deliveries, anything that might give him a glimpse of the schoolteacher. Sometimes he'd linger outside the schoolhouse, listening to her patient voice guiding her students. Once he watched from a distance as she stood up to the town's wealthiest rancher, arguing for equal schooling rights for the children of Mexican laborers. "Education isn't a privilege, Mr. Hollister, it's a necessity," she'd said firmly. "Every child deserves the chance to learn, regardless of where their parents were born." Her courage impressed him. She wasn't causing trouble for its own sake, she was fighting for what was right. One afternoon, as Andrew was loading supplies outside the general store, a commotion drew his attention. 3 cowboys from the neighboring /J ranch had cornered Miguel and another Mexican boy, shoving them against a wall. "You little thieves better empty your pockets," one cowboy growled, grabbing Miguel's collar. Andrew dropped the supplies and strode over. "Let the boys go." The cowboys turned, sizing him up. The largest one sneered. "Mind your own business, double circle. These little greasers were stealing." "We weren't," Miguel cried. "We were just looking at the marbles in the window." Andrew stepped closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "I said let them go." The largest cowboy released Miguel with a shove and squared up to Andrew. "You defending these Mexican brats? Didn't figure you for a troublemaker like that schoolteacher." Andrew's fist connected with the man's jaw before he could think twice. The cowboy staggered back and his friends lunged forward. The fight was brief but brutal. Andrew took a few hits, but his years of hard ranch work gave him the advantage. When it was over, all 3 /J hands were sprawled in the dust, and a small crowd had gathered. "Take your friends and get out of town," Andrew told the largest cowboy, who was nursing a bloody nose. As the cowboys slunk away, Andrew turned to find Zoe standing nearby, her eyes wide with concern. She hurried forward, checking the boys for injuries before turning her attention to Andrew's split lip and bruised knuckles. "Come with me," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "Those cuts need cleaning." In her small house, she gently dabbed at his wounds with a damp cloth. Her touch was light, but even so he winced when she cleaned his cut lip. "Why did you get involved?" she asked softly. "Most men in town look the other way." Andrew met her questioning gaze. "It wasn't right." "No, it wasn't," she smiled slightly. "But standing up for what's right seems to get people labeled as troublemakers around here." He found himself smiling despite his sore lip. Maybe some trouble is worth making. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Miguel's mother arrived, having heard about the incident, and the spell was broken. But something had shifted. For For the first time in years, Andrew had acted on instinct to protect someone besides himself, and it felt right. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of Zoe's face as she tended his wounds kept returning to him, the gentle concern in her eyes, the soft touch of her fingers. It had been so long since anyone had shown him such care. His defenses, built over years of solitude, were beginning to crack. The next day, word of the fight had spread throughout the ranch. To Andrew's surprise, instead of reprimanding him, Tucker merely nodded approvingly. "Those J boys needed taking down a peg," the foreman said. "Just don't make a habit of brawling in town." Later that day, Andrew found himself outside the schoolhouse at dismissal time. Children poured out, laughing and shouting. Miguel spotted him and ran over. "Mr. Ryder, Miss Grayson told us all about how you fought off those bad cowboys, like a real hero." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't that impressive." "Was too," Miguel insisted. "My papa says you're a good man." When the children had dispersed, Zoe emerged from the schoolhouse carrying a stack of books. Her face brightened when she saw him. "Mr. Ryder, what brings you here?" "Andrew," he corrected her, "I thought maybe I could help carry those." She handed him the books with a smile. "Thank you, Andrew." As they walked toward her house, she asked, "How are your injuries today?" "I've had worse." "That doesn't answer my question." He glanced at her, surprised by her persistence. "They're fine, barely feel them." "Men always say that even when they're bleeding half to death," she remarked dryly. Andrew found himself chuckling. "And schoolteachers always exaggerate." Her laugh was like music. Only about matters of health and the importance of grammar. At her door he handed back the books, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked. "As thanks for yesterday." Every instinct told him to refuse, to retreat back to the safety of solitude, but something stronger pulled him forward. "I'd like that," he heard himself say. Over a simple meal of stew and cornbread, they talked, really talked. Andrew found himself telling her about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, about losing his mother to fever when he was 12 and his father to a former friend's bullet 7 years later. "Is that why you keep to yourself?" she asked perceptively. "Because of what happened to your father?" Andrew stared into his coffee cup. He trusted the wrong person, got a bullet in the back for it. "So you decided never to trust anyone again?" "It's kept me alive." Zoe reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his hand. "But is that really living, Andrew? Surviving isn't the same as living." The question haunted him long after he'd returned to the bunkhouse. Was he truly living or merely existing? For years he'd believed his solitude was strength, his distrust wisdom. But watching Zoe, her openness with others, her willingness to fight for what was right even when it made her unpopular, he began to wonder if he'd been wrong all along. The following Sunday, Andrew surprised himself by attending church services. He sat in the back row, hat in hand, watching as Zoe led the children's choir. Her face glowed with joy as she guided their young voices through a simple hymn. When she spotted him in the congregation, her smile widened and something in his chest tightened. After the service, he found himself walking her home, their conversation flowing easily. She told him of her life back east, of coming west after her parents' death to take the teaching position in Silver Creek. "Everyone warned me about the hardships," she said, "but no one mentioned the beauty. The first time I saw the mountains against the sunrise, I knew I'd made the right choice." "Even with all the trouble you've stirred up," he teased gently. Zoe laughed. "Especially because of that, some things are worth fighting for, don't you think? Education, equality, a future where children like Miguel can dream beyond the limitations others place on them." Her passion was captivating. Andrew found himself nodding. "You make me see things differently," he admitted. "When I first heard about you, everyone said you were trouble." "And what do you think now?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. "I think trouble isn't always a bad thing," he said softly. They'd reached her door, but neither seemed eager to part. Finally, Zoe spoke. "There's a harvest dance next Saturday. Would you consider attending? The children have worked hard on the decorations." Andrew hadn't danced in years. The thought of a social gathering filled him with apprehension, but the hopeful look in Zoe's eyes made refusal impossible. "I'll be there," he promised. The week passed in a blur of ranch work and anticipation. Andrew found himself thinking constantly of Zoe, her smile, her courage, the way she looked at the world as a place of possibility rather than danger. For the first time in years, he began to imagine a future beyond the next ranch, the next paycheck. A future that included connections, perhaps even roots. On Saturday evening, Andrew put on his best shirt and borrowed a clean jacket from one of the friendlier hands. The town hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, golden leaves, corn husks, and paper lanterns made by the schoolchildren. When he spotted Zoe across the room and addressed the color of sunset, his heart nearly stopped. She moved through the crowd toward him, her smile radiant. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I said I would." Andrew suddenly felt awkward, unsure what to do with his hands. The fiddle struck up a lively tune, and Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Do you dance, Andrew Ryder?" "Not in a long time," he admitted. "It's like riding a horse," she teased. "You never really forget." When he took her hand, leading her into the dance, something inside him shifted. Here, with Zoe's hand in his, moving together to the music among the townspeople who nodded in greeting, Andrew felt a sense of belonging he'd forgotten was possible. As the evening wore on, they danced, talked, and laughed. Andrew met parents of Zoe's students who spoke glowingly of her teaching. He saw how respected she was, despite the trouble she caused. Most surprisingly, he found himself enjoying the company of others, sharing stories with the blacksmith, discussing cattle prices with the merchants, even joking with some of the other ranch hands. During a slower tune, as Zoe's head rested lightly on his shoulder, Andrew murmured, "Everyone was wrong about you." She looked up. "How so?" "You're not trouble, you're hope." The words felt right as he spoke them, her eyes softened. "Perhaps they were wrong about you too. You're not as solitary as you pretend to be." Before he could respond, the doors of the town hall burst open. 3 men strode in, guns visible on their hips. The music faltered and stopped. Andrew recognized the largest man as the cowboy he'd fought with over Miguel, but now he wore a deputy's badge. "Well, well," the man drawled, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Andrew. "Look what we have here. Andrew Ryder, you're under arrest for the murder of James Wilson, Colorado Territory, 1871. The room fell silent. Andrew felt Zoe stiffen beside him, but she didn't step away. "There must be some mistake," she said firmly. "Mr. Ryder is employed at the Double Circle. He's a respected member of our community." The deputy sneered. "Is that what he told you?" "This man shot James Wilson in the back after a card game. Been running for 7 years. "I didn't kill anyone," Andrew stated, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Wilson was my father's friend. He's the one who shot my father in the back." "Save it for the judge," the deputy said, drawing his gun. "You're coming with us." Andrew felt his world collapsing. Everything he'd begun to build with Zoe, the tentative connections he'd formed, all of it would be destroyed by this lie. Worst of all was the doubt that might now cloud Zoe's eyes when she looked at him. To his surprise, Zoe stepped forward, placing herself between Andrew and the deputy's gun. "Lower your weapon," she demanded. "If you have legitimate charges, present them properly to our sheriff. Until then, you have no authority to arrest anyone in this town." The deputy's face darkened. "Step aside, schoolteacher, this doesn't concern you." "Miss Grayson is right," came another voice. Sheriff Taylor, a man Andrew had seen but never spoken to, moved through the crowd. "I don't recognize your authority here, Jenkins. Last I checked, /J Cowboys don't have jurisdiction in my town." Jenkins flushed angrily. "This man is wanted for murder." "Then show me the official papers," the sheriff countered. "Until then, put away your gun before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." For a tense moment, it seemed the 3 men might resist. Then Jenkins slowly holstered his weapon. "This isn't over," he growled, glaring at Andrew before backing out with his companions. As conversation nervously resumed and the musicians tentatively began playing again, Andrew turned to Zoe, expecting to see doubt or fear in her eyes. Instead, he found only concern. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "You stood up for me," he said, disbelief coloring his voice. "After what they said." "I know a false accusation when I hear one," she touched his arm gently. "But perhaps you should tell me what really happened." They slipped outside, where the cool night air carried the scent of autumn. Sitting on a bench beneath the stars, Andrew told her everything. About his father's death at the hands of James Wilson, about confronting Wilson afterward only to find him already dying from a gunshot wound inflicted by someone else, about fleeing when others arrived and assumed he was the killer. "I've been running ever since," he finished, "staying nowhere long enough to be found, trusting no one with the truth." "But you're innocent," Zoe said. "Why not stand and fight to clear your name?" Andrew shook his head bitterly. "Wilson had powerful friends. My word against theirs would mean nothing. A hanging is all that would be waiting for me." Zoe was silent for a long moment, her hand still resting on his. "What will you do now?" she finally asked, her voice small. The question cut him deeply. "What I've always done." "Move on before trouble follows." "Run again, you mean?" There was no accusation in her tone, only sadness. "Zoe, I don't have a choice." She turned to face him fully, her eyes bright in the moonlight. "You do have a choice, Andrew. You can keep running forever, or you can stand and fight for your real life, not just your survival. Here, with people who care about you." The implication of her words, that she cared for him, sent a surge of both joy and sorrow through his heart. "I can't risk bringing danger to you or anyone else in Silver Creek." "So you'll leave," she said flatly, "just when you were beginning to live again." He had no answer that wouldn't break both their hearts. The next morning, Andrew rose before dawn, packing his few belongings quietly so as not to wake the other hands. He decided to leave without saying goodbye to Zoe. It would be easier that way. Cleaner. He'd tell Tucker he was moving on, collect his pay, and be gone before Jenkins could return with more men. As he saddled Maverick in the pre-dawn darkness, he heard footsteps approaching. Turning, he was surprised to see Mr. Patterson, the ranch owner, a man he'd spoken to perhaps twice since being hired. "Going somewhere, Ryder?" Patterson asked, his weathered face unreadable in the lantern light. "Thought it best," Andrew replied cautiously. "Don't want to bring trouble to your ranch." Patterson nodded slowly. "Tucker told me about last night, said you're accused of murder." "It's not true," Andrew said, though he expected disbelief. To his surprise, Patterson merely shrugged. "Figure if you were a murderer, you'd have shown your colors before now. Been working here 2 months without incident." "I appreciate that, sir, but it doesn't change the fact that there are men who want me dead or in jail." "So you're running again?" It wasn't a question. Andrew tightened Maverick's cinch. "It's what I do. Seems to me a man gets tired of running eventually." Patterson leaned against the stall door. "Sheriff Taylor came by late last night. Says those deputies weren't deputies at all. Just /J hands with fake badges trying to settle a score after that fight you had defending those Mexican boys." Andrew's hands stilled on the saddle. "What?" "Sheriff checked the wires this morning. No wanted posters for an Andrew Ryder in Colorado or anywhere else. No murder charges." Patterson fixed him with a steady gaze. "Seems to me someone's trying to scare you off." Relief and confusion warred within Andrew. But why go to such lengths over a simple fist fight? "Maybe it's not about the fight. Word is Hollister from the /J is sweet on Miss Grayson, has been making offers to court her that she's politely refused. Then suddenly you're dancing with her at the Harvest Festival, looking mighty cozy." Patterson's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Man like Hollister doesn't take rejection well." The implications sank in slowly. There was no murder charge, no one hunting him, just a jealous rancher trying to eliminate a rival. "So I'm not wanted?" Andrew asked, needing to hear it confirmed. "Not by the law at any rate," Patterson straightened. "Now, are you still determined to ride out, or would you rather stay and prove those /J boys can't run you off?" For the first time in 7 years, Andrew felt the weight of constant vigilance lift from his shoulders. He wasn't a wanted man, he didn't have to run. "I'd like to stay," he said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue, "if you'll have me." Patterson nodded once. "Good. Tucker says you're one of the best hands he's had. Be ashamed to lose you over Hollister's jealousy." As the ranch owner walked away, Andrew leaned against Maverick, his mind racing. Everything he'd believed about his situation had been wrong. He'd been running from a threat that no longer existed, perhaps had never truly existed as he'd imagined it. And in running, he'd nearly lost something precious just as he was finding it. The realization propelled him into action. After unsaddling Maverick and turning him back into the corral, Andrew walked to Tucker's cabin to ask permission to go into town. The foreman, already aware of the situation from Patterson, readily agreed. "Don't come back until you've settled things with that schoolteacher," Tucker advised with a knowing look. "Never seen you smile until you started spending time with her." Andrew rode into Silver Creek as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The town was coming alive, shopkeepers opening their doors, children running to school. The schoolhouse itself was already surrounded by playing children, waiting for their teacher to arrive. He dismounted across the street, uncertain how to proceed. What could he say to Zoe after their conversation last night? How could he explain years of running from a shadow? Before he could decide, he spotted her walking toward the schoolhouse, books in hand. Even from a distance, he could see she looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well. The thought that he might be the cause of her distress pained him deeply. Taking a deep breath, Andrew crossed the street. When Zoe saw him, she froze, her expression a mixture of surprise and guarded hope. "You're still here," she said softly as he approached. "I'm still here," he confirmed, "and I'm not leaving." Her eyes searched his. What changed? Andrew explained about Patterson's visit, the fake deputies, Hollister's jealousy. As he spoke, relief washed over Zoe's features. "So there was never any murder charge?" she asked. "There may have been accusations after Wilson's death, but not enough for official charges." "I ran before finding out." Andrew shook his head, the irony not lost on him. "I've been running from my own shadow for 7 years." The bell rang, signaling the start of school. Children began filing into the schoolhouse, many casting curious glances at Andrew and their teacher standing so close together. "I have to teach," Zoe said reluctantly, "but we need to talk." "Will you come by this evening?" "I'll be there," he promised. That day was the longest of Andrew's life. He helped with ranch chores, his mind constantly drifting to the evening ahead. When Tucker finally dismissed him early with a knowing wink, Andrew cleaned up as best he could, even borrowing a fresh shirt from one of the hands. Zoe was waiting on her porch when he arrived, the setting sun casting a golden glow over her hair. She'd changed into a simple dress of deep blue that made her eyes seem even more vivid. "I was afraid you might change your mind," she admitted as he climbed the steps. "Not a chance." He removed his hat, suddenly nervous. "Zoe, I've been thinking all day about what to say to you." She smiled. "Why don't we start with the truth, all of it this time?" Inside, over cups of coffee that grew cold as they talked, Andrew opened up completely. He told her about his years of wandering, about the loneliness he'd convinced himself was preferable to the risk of attachment. He explained how her kindness had gradually worn down his defenses, making him question everything he'd believed about trust and connection. "When I first heard about you, everyone said you were trouble," he said. "But your kindness showed me how wrong they were, how wrong I was about so many things." "We were both misjudged," Zoe said softly. "Perhaps that's why we understand each other." "I want to stay, Zoe." The words came from deep within him. "Not just at the ranch, but here in Silver Creek. I want to stop running and start living." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And what does living mean to you, Andrew?" He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "It means trusting again, building something lasting. It means—" He paused, gathering his courage. "It means seeing if there might be something between us worth fighting for." "There is," she whispered. "At least I believe there is." The certainty in her voice gave him strength. "I've spent 7 years convinced that trust gets people killed. But you've shown me that without trust, without connection, life isn't worth much at all." Zoe squeezed his hands. "It takes courage to change what you believe." "I'm learning from the best," he said with a smile. "You stand up for what's right, even when it makes you unpopular. You showed me that some troubles are worth facing head-on." They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. Andrew would continue working at the Double Circle, but Patterson had mentioned the possibility of becoming foreman eventually. Zoe was determined to build a proper schoolhouse, one big enough for all the children of Silver Creek. Together, they imagined a future neither had dared hope for before. When Andrew finally left, the moon high overhead, Zoe walked him to the door. Before he could say goodnight, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "Just so we're clear about my intentions, Mr. Ryder," she said with a smile. Andrew touched her cheek gently. "Perfectly clear, Miss Grayson." The following months transformed Silver Creek, and Andrew along with it. With the truth about his past no longer haunting him, he threw himself into ranch work with renewed purpose. Patterson, impressed with his dedication, promoted him to assistant foreman by Christmas. Hollister's attempts to discredit Andrew backfired when the truth about the fake deputies came to light. The Slash J owner found himself ostracized by much of the town, his influence diminished. Andrew began helping with Zoe's campaign for a proper schoolhouse, speaking at town meetings and contributing part of his wages to the building fund. Working together, they secured enough support that construction began in the spring. Their courtship progressed naturally, their bonds strengthening through shared purpose and growing affection. Andrew discovered the joy of being part of a community, of forming friendships and putting down roots. He still valued self-reliance, but he no longer confused isolation with strength. On a warm evening in May 1879, as they stood watching the nearly completed schoolhouse, Andrew turned to Zoe. "I've been thinking," he said, suddenly nervous despite months of planning. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, echoing a joke between them. "Patterson offered me the foreman position, Tucker's retiring end of summer." Zoe's eyes widened. "Andrew, that's wonderful news." "There's more," he took her hands in his. "The job comes with the use of the small house near the east pasture. It needs some work, but it's a good, solid place." He swallowed hard. "Too big for just one person, though." Zoe's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Andrew dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a single pearl, modest, but the best he could afford after saving for months. "Zoe Grayson, you showed me that trust isn't weakness, it's strength. You taught me that some troubles are worth facing and some people are worth fighting for. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend my life proving it." His voice was steady despite his pounding heart. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Andrew marveled at how completely his life had changed. A year ago he'd been a drifter, convinced that isolation was the only way to survive. Now, with Zoe in his arms and a future stretched bright before them, he understood at last what she'd been trying to tell him all along. Surviving wasn't living, trust wasn't weakness. And sometimes the things people warned you against turned out to be exactly what you needed most. Their wedding in August was attended by the entire town. Patterson gave the bride away, Miguel proudly carried the rings, and Tucker, though officially retired, stood as Andrew's best man. The new schoolhouse, completed just in time, hosted the reception, its large windows open to the summer breeze. As Andrew and Zoe danced their first dance as husband and wife, he pulled her close and whispered, "Remember when everyone told me you were trouble?" She laughed, the sound still the sweetest music to his ears. "The best kind of trouble. The kind worth staying for," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. In the years that followed, as they built their life together at the double circle, raised children of their own, and watched Silver Creek grow into a thriving community, Andrew never forgot how close he'd come to missing it all. Sometimes at night, with Zoe sleeping peacefully beside him, he would remember the lonely cowboy he'd once been, always moving, never connecting, running from shadows of his own making. And he would be grateful, deeply grateful, for the twist of fate that had brought him to Silver Creek, to the schoolteacher everyone said was trouble, whose kindness had proven them all wrong.